So my name's Matt Aslett. I'm Research Vice President for Data, AI, and Analytics at 451 Research. And I'm going to be talking for the next half an hour or so about sort of the next wave, the trends that we're seeing driving the market in 2019 and beyond. And we're sort of deliberately looking at the short term. I think, as analysts, researchers, we have a tendency sometimes to kind of leap ahead and look too far ahead, and that's when you get into disillusionment, etc. So what we always try and do at this time of year is predict, what we think the key trends will be in the next 12 to 18 months at the most. So that's what I'll be talking about in this session, with a few other things thrown in for good measure in terms of the market at the moment as we see it. So just briefly to introduce you to 451 Research, for anybody who's not come across the company before. So we're a research and an IT advisory company. We've been around since 2000. Well, you can see the stats there. I won't go into those. One thing I will point to, perhaps most importantly, is 85,000 plus IT professionals, business users, and consumers in our research community. It's something that probably not as many people as we would like know about 451 Research. It's something we've been building up over the last few years. And so these are people who are not customers, direct customers of the company, although some of them work for companies that are, but they're practitioners, people out there in the field working with technology, as part of their daily working lives and obviously their home lives, and those two are increasingly overlapping, and they help shape our view on the world as being part of what we call our 451 Alliance and taking part in surveys and doing in-depth interviews, and as I say, an increasingly important part of the organization, and help shape our view. And you'll see some of the results of some of the things we do with that group in the presentation. So if that's something actually you might be interested in joining, what you get for being part of that community is free access to our research. So as I say, we don't claim them as customers, but people who get free access to all the research that we have. So if it's something you're interested in, you'll see our details at the end, and please let us know. We're always looking to add people to that group. So just a little bit about the channel that I run. So we organize our research into what we call channels, and I'm responsible for running the Data, AI, and Analytics channel. This is actually something we've evolved during this year. Previously, our core focus was data platforms and analytics, and we would focus on data platforms, data management, data science, and analytics. What we've done this year, we've expanded that channel in a couple of areas. We've added artificial intelligence, which makes it sound like we weren't covering this in the past. It's not that. It was like our focus on AI was as part of data science and analytics tools. We've now expanded the team. We're looking on that at that area much more sort of in and of itself. And my colleague, Nick Patience, who's actually one of the founders of 451 Research, is leading our focus on AI, beyond, as it impacts the entire market, not just within the data and analytics space. And the other thing we've done is we've added to the team. We've had someone within 451 Research focused on blockchain for actually a couple of years. Chila Zigri, actually based over in Spain. And she was part of our cloud team, and we were focused on blockchain as very much sort of an emerging technology, seeing where it was going. And when Chila's now joined the expanded data and AI and analytics team, so we're focused much more on blockchain now as part of sort of the data platforms coverage, and thinking about how it coexists with existing data platforms technologies, and how adoption will be driven by choices around data platforms technologies. So in terms of our AI coverage in particular, so this is a representation of all the channels that we have within 451 Research, different areas of coverage. And as I say, our AI coverage is now focused not just on, as it relates to data and analytics products and technologies, but what Nick is doing as part of our team is driving our coverage and understanding of how AI will have implications and is being introduced into all areas that we cover, from sort of data center services and infrastructure, applied infrastructure and DevOps, right out to customer experience and commerce. And we're very much working with the rest of the analysts within 451 Research to understand and articulate how AI as a whole, changing just the industry itself, but society at large. And if you think about sort of our course of data, AI, and analytics coverage, much of it for the last few years has been about this idea of being data-driven. And this is something, obviously, we hear a lot of companies talking about. clearly is the data-driven room just next door here. We've had a lot of companies on stage here talking about being data-driven. And it's something that we've put a lot of thought into. Well, what does it actually mean? Because obviously a lot of organizations for hundreds of years have been making decisions based on data. So what's different now? And what we see is it's actually embedding data into the heart of the business, using it to drive not just business intelligence decisions, but the entirety of the business itself. And what we see is that more and more companies are actually taking steps to become more data-driven. They're not just talking about something that they want to do, they're actually doing things about it. We've just recently completed, we published last week, we'll actually make this available today, we're putting out the press release today, our Voice of the Enterprise Data and Analytics Study. This is our inaugural study using that 451 Alliance group that I talked about. That's 85,000 strong, about 1,000 of those people responded to this study, talking specifically about data and analytics. These are people who are working with data and analytics products day to day and how their organizations use data. And some of the results we got, like this one, are not surprising in any way, but what they do is they provide some data that back up what we're seeing when we have conversations with people in the industry. And what we see is that 75% of respondents say data will become more important to their organization in the next 12 months. No surprise there. And actually, if you look at, it's 95% say it will be the same or more important. You have to wonder what those other 5% are doing. Certainly, if we think about how organizations are investing in data, we would have some concerns about that 5%, about whether their organizations are going to stay in business. But, what is important is we see that 45% of organizations are responding to us here, see that that data is going to be somewhat more important 12 months from now, and 30% significantly more important 12 months from now. And these numbers go up even more when we think about companies that are taking more decisions driven by data. And the way we've thought about that is we asked companies how, to what extent are you already making decisions driven by data? And we divided the results, therefore, sort of the one end of the spectrum, you've got your data, what we call the data drivers. Those are the companies that are making the majority or nearly all of their decisions driven by data. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you've got the data drifters who are just kind of toddling along, and every now and then will make decisions based on data. They're incorporating it where it needs to be, but not as part of the core part of the business. And doing this actually exposes some really interesting things about the differences between those companies that are making most and the least decisions driven by data. There's really some key things that we can point to, and this is just a number of those. So within the study itself, all the data, if you get access to the study, obviously it's purchasable. The data itself, there's much more in there, but these are some of the key things that we pulled out. Look at data drivers, as you might expect, they see that data will be more important to them over the next year, 81% to 55%, but also things like the use of emerging technologies. We use here the phrase big data platform, basically Hadoop, Spark, etc. 39% already using that versus 16% of data drifters, 33% using NoSQL versus 19%. And the way in which they're using that data, the things they're focused on. So obviously, understanding customers is a key driver across the board. But in terms of actually driving competitive advantage and seeing that as something that has been delivered, 63% of data drivers versus 34% of data drifters. And there's some interesting things about how they're able to do this. This next one's an example of that. Do they have buy-in from executive management in vendor selection when it comes to data platforms and analytics technologies? 59% of data drivers do versus 41% of data drifters. And you flip that on its head, we also see in the data that data drifters are much more concerned about a lack of executive buy-in. They're also involving less likely to involve other groups within the organization, particularly developers, which stands out, 23% versus 6%. But also data analysts, data scientists, and other groups. So those that are driving more decisions through data are spreading it throughout the organization. They're involving more people within the organization in the decision-making process for vendors and suppliers. And this has implications, obviously, for them internally, but also for the vendor community. So not surprisingly, we've got a lot of interest already in this from the vendors trying to figure out how they can identify and speak to the data drivers. And also, I was surprised the difference here in terms of using public cloud, for example, using infrastructure as a service. So 24% of data drivers are already using infrastructure as a service specifically for data platforms and analytics, as you can see, compared to 4% of data drifters. So there's much more, as I said, within the data itself. And there's more. We published a report just last week, pulling out a few more details on this. But this is something we're going to continue to work on, this sort of idea of data drivers and data drifters. We've got another study, I think we're completing before the end of the year, focused more on analytics. This one was focused specifically on data platforms and applying this same kind of methodology to try and help identify what it actually means to be data-driven, both in terms of the technologies you're using and organizationally, and the attitudes and cultural aspects to that. But that's actually not what I was here to talk about in terms of sort of the the trends that we're looking at for the next year. And as I said, we publish a report every year looking at the trends. So we divide those up in terms of our core areas of focus: data platforms, data management, data science, analytics, and AI. So we'll start at the bottom and data platforms and work our way through those. If we think about data platforms and the changes we expect in the data platform space in the next year, then one of the key areas of focus, of course, is going to be Cloudera and Hortonworks acquisition. I use that term deliberately. People talk about a merger of equals. It's not. It's an acquisition. We can go into details on why that is, but there's no need now. But this is clearly going to be a core area of focus, both in terms of trying to figure out what that strategy is going to be, what the Cloudera Hortonworks combined strategy is going to be, and what the implications are going to be for the various open source projects that have been backed to date, particularly by Hortonworks. Now, of course, the deal is not going to close till the first quarter of 2019, assuming it does, and we've got no reason to believe that it won't. So until then, obviously, both companies are not talking about it, so it doesn't stop us speculating, but we are speculating. But we can think about, well, which projects might survive as the company thinks about this kind of Unity release that they've talked about. And the interesting thing is, so I took these details from this was the last published data that I could find in terms of the HDP and CDH, the latest versions. And it is interesting, there is obviously a lot of commonality between the two. And obviously, when in announcing the deal, Cloudera and Hortonworks made a big point about the fact that they were united around kind of, core open source projects. And that is absolutely true. But you can see there's a lot more that differentiates their strategies than unites them. There's a lot of projects, particularly on the Hortonworks side, that are open source but are not within Cloudera's distribution. And obviously, Cloudera has its own enterprise focus. So in particular, things like security and data management and data governance, where actually, you had Hortonworks creating open source projects that arguably deliberately competed specifically with the Cloudera enterprise products. So this is going to be, there are going to be some significant difficult decisions that the combined company will have to take in terms of which projects continue to be supported, which projects continue to be developed. What I do think, though, if you look at, as I say, they're not talking yet because the deal's not done in terms of what they intend to do, but what they have said is that the Unity release will be a superset of CDH and HDP. Existing customers of both will be supported for 3 years, so you've got some time to think about it. But also, clearly, what is going to be important to them is to provide some kind of consistency. So if you're an HTTP customer and you're using Atlas and Ranger and Ambari significantly, then the combined company is going to have to provide some sort of consistency with the Unity release to enable organizations moving forward. Same too with the Cloudera Enterprise product. So my guess, and again, we're speculating, is that the Unity release will look something like this. Not just everything but the kitchen sink, but everything, including the kitchen sink, and actually everything, including 2 kitchen sinks. So I think, if you're expecting, an immediate sort of, announcements in terms of open source projects being dropped or sort of kind of retired, I don't think that's going to happen. That will happen in time. Obviously, there is going to be a need for the combined company to focus its development efforts in some areas rather than others. But initially, as I say, my guess is that you're looking at Unity releases being kind of everything in there to provide that consistency for organizations moving forward. That actually, though, is not what our main trend or prediction is for 2019 in this space. It's actually about data marts and data warehouses and data lakes and Hadoop and the definition of Hadoop. And it was interesting seeing Mike Stonebreaker talking this morning and making some quite sort of sweeping generalizations about what Hadoop is and isn't and what that means. And it's kind of interesting when you talk to a lot of enterprise clients, you really get different pictures from them about what they consider to be a data warehouse, what they consider to be a data lake, and how those things combine with the technologies underneath. Historically, of course, we've always associated the data warehouse, the data mart, with a relational database because that's what they ran on. And then, Hadoop came along and you have the data lake. Initially on HDFS, not necessarily on HDFS. We see a lot of organizations today are looking to run actually their data lakes on S3 or ADSL or Google Cloud Storage and bring in some analytics engines from the Hadoop stack into that environment. So it's not Hadoop anymore, but it's a Hadoop-centric kind of data lake. So we also see companies talking about Snowflake or Redshift as their data lake. And we see companies talking about Cloudera as their data warehouse. And of course, we need to get beyond this idea that data warehouse runs on a relational database, because of course you can, if you choose to, run a data warehouse with a subset of data with schema applied within or next to a data lake. And you can need to think about kind of the way you think about this is actually perhaps as a logical data lake or a total data warehouse or whatever you want to describe it as. But it gets to look something very much like ING were talking earlier, where you've got a combined, a different combination of technologies being put together to solve a purpose. And it doesn't really matter what you call it, but we need to get beyond kind of these, trying to put things in buckets and kind of restrict our mentality about what can be used for what purpose. And it's interesting, if we think about the survey results we've seen, we asked organizations, what are the analytic databases that they are using? And the interesting thing that jumped out to me, 15%, 13%, not a huge number, but it's interesting. Think Cloudera, Hortonworks, 5% think MapR as their analytic database. Now, as we said, if we traditionally put things in boxes, this just wouldn't make sense, but this is the world that we're looking at. And we need to get beyond this idea that certain technologies can only be used for certain purposes. And it's about creating or selecting the right vendors, the right partners to deliver the overall data management results that an organization is looking for. So the trend that we expect to see more of is this convergence of the kind of the concepts and the suppliers in this space towards an overall data architecture, which is enabled by multiple technologies and components underneath. The second major trend we're looking at for this year is blockchain. As I said, we've actually added blockchain coverage to my team's focus this year. I must admit, I've been pretty skeptical about blockchain and the extent to which we should cover it within our team. And I'm not certainly alone in that. This data actually comes from our security, Voice to Enterprise Security study, and asking which is the most overhyped buzzword in the industry right now. And as you can see, blockchain way ahead, even ahead of things like AI and IoT and quantum computing. So there's a lot of people with a lot of concerns about blockchain, its actual applicability, and it's just overhyped. But also what we see is there's a lot of people who believe that blockchain can deliver significant transformational impact. So we asked, this is from our digital pulse, which goes across all the people that we speak to, and asking, so the important thing is which do you think will have the greatest transformational impact? So it's only 14% for blockchain, so it's pretty low down, particularly compared to like cloud and AI. but it's still ahead of things like location-based technologies or robotics or AR, VR. So there's a significant portion of people who actually do see that blockchain can deliver some real results for them and have real transformational impact in their industry. Yes, it's overhyped. Yes, it can have some transformational impact, and those two things are not, those two things can coexist at the same time. So we've been trying to figure out, I've been trying to figure out from my perspective, where does blockchain fit, therefore? And what I came down to at the end was this idea, like, if you love blocks and you need to store your data and change, you're going to love blockchain. Well, that was a bit too simple, so we had to expand it from there. But what we see is, if you want immutable records chronologically linked together in blocks and you're part of a trustless chain, blockchain is probably, not definitely, probably the right technology for you. If not, then the chances are that a traditional distributed database, or indeed perhaps a combination of blockchain or distributed ledger and distributed database technologies, might be more likely to fit your needs. And that is something we're seeing increasingly, is actually both from the vendor community and the user community, them using both blockchain/distributed ledger and an existing distributed database technology in combination to deliver a certain requirement. But our actual sort of prediction in terms of the key trends for the next year is in terms of industry-specific and cross-industry blockchains actually going live and being available, and things that, thanks, that organizations can partake in, particularly in areas like trade finance and supply chain and provenance. So we see this provenance, particularly with diamonds, is a good example. I have used a picture of mangoes here because it seems to me that it's some kind of law that if you're doing a presentation about blockchain, you have to talk about mangoes. Mangoes are to blockchain what nappies and beer, or diapers and beer, were to business intelligence. It seems every kind of presentation I've seen talks about the provenance of mangoes through the blockchain. Obviously, one of the core examples of that, though, did run into some problems because actually the people who were handling the mangoes didn't bother to actually enter the details into the blockchain. So there are still some pieces that need to be completed as part of this puzzle. But the more these actual industry-specific and cross-industry projects go live, the more obviously enterprises can partake in them, and I think we'll begin to figure out where these kind of capabilities do fit within their overall landscape. I've taken far too much time on the first part, so I'm going to have to run through this quickly. Agility and DataOps is the third aspect. Obviously, DataOps Theatre just over here. There was some great sessions in there. We see more and more focus on DataOps. It's why, again, one of those things I was very skeptical about as a term. But the more we looked into it, the more we realized that even though companies we were talking to weren't using the term DataOps, they were doing things, the concepts, processes, organizational change that fit under the DataOps umbrella. So we've actually just done a study we've just completed for a client with customers who are using DataOps, and we had about 150 of those, quite a small study. In order to get to that 150 people, we had to interview more than 20 times that number. So that gives you a sense of how many people are actually doing DataOps today. But what we found is overwhelmingly, those that are love it. They're investing further in it, both in terms of the technologies and the training and the organizational change to make DataOps a greater part of their organization. Some of the reasons for that is, we talk about being data-driven, and there's great advantages of being data-driven, get data into the part of the business, drive decisions based on data. There's some great benefits to that. There are also some challenges, clearly, that come along with that. And one of the things we've seen is that the more data you have, the more data sources that organizations are trying to make decisions based on, the bigger a challenge accessing and preparing data is for them. So there's still clearly changes that need to be made at the data management level. We need more agile approaches to data management in order for organizations to actually make the most of all this data that they're investing in. And I think it goes back to what Mike Stoneberger was talking about this morning. You can do that with technology, but absolutely we see there needs to be an investment in organizational and cultural change, which is what DataOps is fundamentally all about, to make that happen as well. A lot of that is to do with operationalization of data science and data processing workloads. Operationalization is a word I said it twice there. Usually I stumble over that, hence my point that it's hard to say, but even harder to do. It's just not something that organizations have really focused on, particularly as it comes to data science, because they're in the most organizations still in the experimentation phase for data science, trying to figure out what it means to them. The more you invest in data science, the more you need to apply attention not just to data collection, data structuring, and data modeling, but actually putting the outcomes of those steps into production, into operation, and ensuring that those models are managed and monitored and kept up to date and continually, particularly in relation to machine learning models, obviously continually trained. And that is a absolutely fundamental element in ensuring that organizations have successful data science projects. It's something that actually, this is interesting. So this is from our Voice of the Enterprise AI and ML study, which is a separate study we published earlier this year. As you can see, only 9% of respondents saying that deploying results in an operational system was the major challenge for them. The caveat to that was, this was pick one. This wasn't pick any and all. So 9% saying that was the most significant challenge to them. Our belief, based on other responses that we got in this study, was that the reason that's only 9% is that a lot of organizations just haven't got to that stage yet. They're still doing experimentation and development of AI and machine learning. Well, that brings us on to the final challenge that we see, which is the top one here, not enough skilled resources. And so, this is clearly by some distance in terms of AI adoption, the number one challenge. We also see that as a significant challenge in terms of data science more generally and data analytics still. It was interesting, Doug Cutting saying yesterday he didn't see this as a challenge. I mean, our data would suggest that a lot of enterprises still do. It is something that's definitely improving and it's getting better, but it is still a challenge. And I think one of the ways we need the industry to respond to that is to take the advice of a scientist rather than a data scientist. Take the complex and make it simple. And this is something that obviously a lot of organizations, vendors, are trying to do in terms of products for want of a better phrase, citizen data scientists, data analysts, enabling them to take advantage of data science and AI models and services. But it needs to go further. We need the machine learning to be opened up to developers, not just data analysts, data scientists, but developers of all kinds, to incorporate both the models and the results of those models into enterprise applications. There needs to be more understanding of the different skills and the workflows that are needed in machine learning versus traditional software development. It's not something that you develop that model and then you're done and you go on to the next version. It's a continuous process, very much a continuous integration and development process. Hence, obviously there's the tie-in with all these trends, ties in very much with DataOps as well. We've seen the emergence this year, certainly of low-code services for less technical users, AutoML, for example, from various cloud providers. We see obviously the adoption of those next year, perhaps more of those kind of environments actually available on premises as well. But less perhaps about the products and services, more about how organizations can understand how they're using those. So machine learning and particularly deep learning needs to be more understandable. It needs to be more understandable to the end users, the data analysts, the developers of machine learning-based applications, but also to the business. In particular, this last point about understanding how a decision has been reached. And that's not just something that's good business practice. It's also something increasingly is fundamentally important for regulatory reasons as well, and actually being able to explain why a decision was made by a machine learning model. Obviously, there are other regulatory aspects to that as well, and just good data governance. So we think about the core trends, just to sum up, that we see for data AI and analytics in, as I say, in 2019 and beyond. And as you can see, these do all overlap, and there's more beyond here. But the increasing convergence of Hadoop and inverted commas and the data warehouse, as well as industry-specific and cross-industry blockchains going live. DataOps, driving more agile development, more organizations understanding both the opportunities for that DataOps, but perhaps the things they're already doing and realizing that they're doing these things because it's good business practice, but that it's part of a broader sort of DataOps strategy or umbrella. In terms of data science and analytics, that increased focus on the last mile of data science, on operationalization, and products and services coming to market that actually help, not just data scientists to achieve that, but also one thing I should have said, that combination of data scientists and data management staff as well, and enabling collaboration between the two. This is something, obviously, that the industry has struggled with for a very long time between sort of the data consumers and the data operators or data management. So that's obviously what DataOps is all about. So those two do flow into each other in terms of enabling those groups to work together a lot more. And then in terms of AI, AI being much more sort of automated and explainable, as I said, for good old-fashioned business reasons, but also for regulatory reasons as well. So that's a rapid run through of the key trends. There's much more. We have the report associated with this will be coming out towards the end of the year, and that's widely available. Much more detail in terms of what we see around that, all of these key trends and the industry evolution as a whole. But with that, I will thank you very much. And as I say, if you're interested in finding out more about what we do or the core research we've got or becoming part of that 85,000 strong group of 451 Alliance members, just get in contact probably with me directly on Twitter for that. If you go to 451research.com, you can actually register for free access to the research on a trial basis as well. So I would encourage you to do that. No obligation. Just get in there and have a look and see what research we have. With that, though, thank you very much. Happy to take questions over here if anybody's got any, but thank you very much for coming to this session.
Thank you for coming. If I could please ask you to take all your rubbish